Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Aimee Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Zwallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries. Hello there, fellow Intentionists. Today we are talking about one of Aimee and I's favorite topics ever, creativity, something near and dear to both of our hearts. As you guys know, if you've been with us for a while, I think we touch on this topic literally every week in some form or another, but it seems like the more we look around at the collective energy in our conversations, at least this week, wouldn't you agree, Aimee?
Yes.
Looking at people that we know and examining kind of what's up for us in our own lives, we feel like now more than ever, people are really yearning to connect to their creative powers, their inner creative wisdom, and doing it in ways that are really close. I mean, they're all kind of spiritual. At least that's how I always view any creative act that I do, even if it's like something simple, like a little craft or something.
Mm-hmm.
So a few months ago, we had Tashi Powers, who is an evolutionary astrologer, on the podcast, and she talked about how the big tasks for the collective right now are shedding domination and submission patterns of oppression. So I really feel like we're all doing this in one way or another in our personal lives, whether it be through a faith crisis or finding your voice or just shedding belief systems about yourself or the negativity in your life and accessing our spirituality in new ways. But then there's also collectively, we're kind of seeing it play out. So, like just watch the polarization of the news, right? So given that today is the full moon in Capricorn, it's the full moon in Capricorn eclipse after the new moon in Cancer eclipse. We've had like a 16-day power vortex. And we thought it would be a great time to lean into the creative energy of learning how to access our creativity to help and to help us through our crisis times.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about fear factors that come up when we step into a creative project, the resistance that comes up, how to cultivate daily actionable inspiration practices. And both Aimee and I have been honing our crafts this year. And so we will be sharing some personal experiences as well as some really great research from various books and web sources, and also some insights from some feedback that we got from a listener and fellow creative traveler on Instagram. So whether you consider yourself an artist or you think that is something that other people do, or you just land somewhere in between, I think there's something in here for everyone. Wouldn't you say?
Yes.
So our intention for you today is to leave inspired to dig deeper into your human experience and to find empowerment to access your own creativity in whatever way you feel called.
Yes. Thank you for that intro, Hilary. I've been so excited for this episode. And really quick, before we dive in, just a reminder, we have a monthly newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website, intentionists.com. And we have some really exciting things in the works that we can't wait to share more about, and they are involving creativity. We are creating a course focused around using creativity to move through those difficult places of spiritual crisis and transition that we talk about so often here on the podcast. So we can't wait to give you more info on that as it comes. So stay tuned for that.
Yay! So let's dive right in.
Yeah. So creativity in the broadest sense is basically living. And I've been reading a lot of books that I'll be referring to throughout this episode. And the first one is a book called The Courage to Create by Rollo May. And he says that creativity is the most basic manifestation of a man or a woman fulfilling his or her own being in the world. And creativity can be seen only in the act. So humans are just innately creative. There's not creative people, there's only creative acts. So we're here to kind of unpack that, demystify it.
And also to jump in there, I feel like culturally we're conditioned to look at the result. Wouldn't you say? That it's
Yes.
like we go to the museum and we see like the masterpiece that was created, or we go see the film that is finished, or we go read the book that is done. And so there's something, I mean, obviously the joy and the pain kind of can be in the process, but
Right.
But kind of peeling back the idea that the result doesn't even really matter. wouldn't you say?
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're
That's kind of
right
what you
there.
mean by the life, right?
Yeah, and the product is something that is definitely emphasized because that's what people can see in the end, but the real creation is wrought in the act. Like that is the process. So, I wanted to talk about attention a little bit, Hilary.
Yes.
As I was thinking the other night, and I was sitting kind of in this meditative state, watching my little thoughts march by through my mind, I realized that we create our experiences in every moment by choosing what little thoughts we're going to pay attention to. So, our attention and how we choose to direct it is really how we create our reality.
Absolutely.
If we look at it this way, every moment can be seen as an act of creation.
I really think that that ideology too really helps to pull you out of some dark places.
Yes, it's empowering.
When you're in it, yeah, it is empowering because when
Mhm,
you're oftentimes, and there's various reasons to feel suffering and they're all
mhm.
valid, I think. I wouldn't say to anyone who's in real suffering that like your suffering doesn't matter. It's all in your mind. But
Right,
on the one hand, I mean, at its purest form, it is, right? Because it's what we're continuing to honor every moment. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen and that we aren't riddled with pain and suffering at different times. But to your point, yes,
right. Well, yeah, it's not about even trying to remove suffering or like ignore it. It is about just engaging, with the experience of life. It's about creativity, I think, is engaging with our thoughts and directing our attention in various ways and then translating it into action and expressing the idea, expressing the feeling. Like it doesn't have to be a happy feeling, it can be a sad feeling, but like just the engagement is like where the creativity is.
I love that too, because it makes me think when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about there's always these little, like Oprah says, these aha moments, that you
Yeah.
have when you're in the process of viewing things in a creative way,
Mhm.
that it makes everyday boring life so much more interesting.
Right. Well, and I think too, like you were saying, Hillary, creativity is kind of right along there with spirituality. So when we talk about like intuition and inspiration and all these things, they're arguably arising from the same mysterious source, which people call the unconscious, grace, God, your higher self, or whatever it is you want to call it. And you kind of can approach it in the same way. So on the one hand, creativity comes from this mystical source and it's this mystical thing, but on the other hand, the ways to engage with it are not all that mysterious. It's literally just engaging with our world and expressing about it in spite of our fear and continuing to act and really deciding to believe that you can create and that you can create change, beauty, connection, fill in the blank, whatever it is that you're trying to do.
I think one of the beliefs I see a lot of people who, and I'm assuming that the majority of the people that are listening to this podcast are relatively creative, because I find anyone who's really spiritually minded is is in touch with that on whatever level. It might not
Mhm.
look like we're taught in society that creativity looks a certain way. Like it's what's in museums, and there's certain varying
Right.
degrees of how good someone is, and that's merit for whether or not they can do that or not. And so to bring up your point about that fear factor, that can be a tough thing to overcome if we are constantly viewing ourselves in terms of the result. I wanted to add to what you were saying about the experience and the attention,
Mhm.
that like you were talking about mindfulness, right? And I was just thinking these exact thoughts this week. I've been in such a place of joy, and it's been weird because I feel like normally it's like up and down and all around, right? Like, sure, I'm
Mhm.
happy, but I'm also sad, and I'm like also pensive, and it's like high and low, high and low. And typically during an eclipse thing, I'm really a mess. And this time I feel like it's just been really, I've just been trying to tune into that subtle energy and really be present during this time instead of judging myself for how I'm behaving or what I'm getting done or what I'm not getting done, and just really focus on like the small things in front of me. And of course, I have so many days where I'm checked, like so many moments throughout the day where I'm totally checked out and I'm not
Mhm.
successful at this. But I find that the happiest moments that I have during the day are when I'm like, oh, look at my cactus, it's growing. Or like,
Yeah.
I'm walking down the neighborhood and it's like, noticing the children playing and watching them laugh and having their own human experiences. And I'm finding that everything is inspirational to me. Like I'm finding,
Yes.
and this is the other thing is, I've mentioned multiple times I'm writing a book. I'm so close to being done with the first draft. Like I'm so close. I'm sending it to the editor on Thursday. Like that is happening. So in 3 days,
Yes.
like no matter what, it's going to be done. At least the first draft, right? Which is who knows how close we are to actually being done. But I find
But
that
still.
having this like overarching creative project
Mm-hmm.
has made my life experience so rich because everything I'm drawing inspiration from literally everything around me, whether I'm on a trip or I'm watching the sunrise or the sunset, and I've kind of got this like umbrella idea of what I'm trying to create in my book. And I'll just kind of ask the universe for the problems. Like if I'm having a problem in my plot, to just kind of help me, show me different things. And I find that there's like signs in nature, or I'll talk to a friend, or I'll pick up a book that I had been reading like 6 months ago. And then I open it to where I had stopped reading, and it'll be like the exact concept that I was kind of mulling around in my brain. Anyway, so it's just been this really, I find that it's that magic of manifesting and finding gratitude. And it's not like everything's been great. My whole family's been sick all week. We've had strep and we've been whatever. My one son was like puking. It was just a whole disaster. But I was like, I'm happier than I've been in a long time because of this. We were preparing for this episode. So obviously I was like, it was in the forefront of my mind. And I thought, man, this is the secret.
Yeah.
This is what it's all about.
It's true. It is everywhere. Like inspiration can be found anywhere. It's just a matter of noticing it and looking, like engaging with it in that way. There are lots of different ways you can in your mind visualize this whole process of the synchronistic signs coming out of the woodwork, when you're engaged in this creative work. But it can also be frustrating because it is, the source of it is kind of like this mystery, like in the unconscious. But the keys that I kind of wanted to drive home here are just the conscious, dedicated attention. Like you saw, you're consciously dedicated to this book and you're consciously dedicated to doing this podcast episode. Therefore, you discovered all this stuff around you.
Right. That supports the original intention and the original commitment to being creative. I totally agree. This is something that I feel like you and I have both been learning through this podcast. Like I didn't understand it to the level that I do now because of the daily and weekly commitment to both the writing and this,
Right. And I think that like once we commit to giving our dedicated attention to some sort of creative work, your unconscious or God or your higher self, whatever you want to call this thing, it does the work like behind the scenes to complete this idea that you have that remains incomplete. You start it and it's not finished, but it only emerges once you have decided to act. And I love what I was saying about Anne Lamott. You've read Bird by Bird, haven't you? Or no?
I'm sure I have. I mean, I think I've got it on my shelf. I can't remember. It's been like years since I read it.
How she talks about the unconscious, she describes it as this kid or this like Dr. Seuss character in the basement. And that is the unconscious that's doing the real creating. And she says that he's peaceful and he's just playing. And you can't buy a key to let you into the cellar. You just have to relax and wool gather, which is what she calls kind of just noticing the inspiration everywhere. Get rid of the critics and practice. That's the method for accessing this little guy in the cellar. But I thought that was a cute way to imagine it.
I love that. I was thinking too about how this can apply if you're not, I mean, this is like directly applicable if you're in a field where you are trying to be creative or you are making money from being an artist or an actor or whatever you're doing. But if you're in a line of work that wouldn't be deemed by the outside as like a creative thing, like maybe you're working in city government, or maybe you're working in a business, or maybe you're working at a law firm, and you're thinking, well, yeah, that's what I do as a hobby. I think this is one where you can get connected to the process of creativity to solve problems. Like I find this is the same thing. Like when you're paying attention to these signs in nature, if you're worried about some big case or you're worried about something, and you're willing to be open, you're willing to open your mind to have answers come in untraditional ways. You can go into your dreamscape, you can go into your nature walk, your mindful walk, you can go into a museum and see something that can sometimes give you the answer to difficult problems,
Yeah, and it often happens, don't you find, when you're relaxed, like it's not when you're directly engaged with the problem. It's like afterwards when you are walking down the street or just waking up from sleep or in the shower or whatever. It's like,
Absolutely.
so that's where the importance of like, yeah, you have to insert your rest and your relaxing time into the work and the hard action, which I mean, that's something we talk about all the time on here too, is the balance, the cyclic balance of that.
Yes, absolutely. Did you want to go into the fear factor?
Yeah, fear. I noticed as I was looking at these different books on creativity, almost all of them had in common fear of some sort in their title. So, like the Rollo May one is The Courage to Create. I love Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic Creative Living Beyond Fear. And then another one that I found is called Creative Confidence by Tom and David Kelly, which I'll talk about in a second. But first, I wanted to share what Rollo May had to say about why courage is necessary in creative endeavors. He said, which I thought was interesting because people usually think about it like, yeah, everyone's afraid to fail, everyone's unsure of the unknown. But he said that in creativity, new insights are replacing old ones. So things must be destroyed. And this carries an inherent fear. And he called kind of the creative work a battle with the gods of the status quo in the current paradigm. And so art, like what it does when we create something new, whether, I mean, it doesn't have to be art. This can be like a scientific breakthrough. This can be like making dinner for the night.
Well, and it can be a new way of engaging in like the media or a new way of engaging in leadership or government or all of that stuff. Yes.
Yes, exactly. But the fact is that art, like in its broadest sense, transforms. And it's not only the creator in the act of making it, but also the people encountering it. It's a creative act because they are having an exchange of attention and energy with something. So that's part of where the fear comes from. Do you have anything else to say about that before I go into like phobias?
Yeah, maybe. Yes. Let me think. So the stuff I wrote down for fear factor this week for me was in regards to, I've been thinking about my whole experience in creating this book has been an exercise in me getting in touch with my subtle energetic body, which to some people is like, that's not even real. But to people I'm assuming who are listening to the Intentionists, they're like, oh yeah, the subtle energetic body. Of course. We know about this. It's our aura, it's our chakras, it's all of it's energy, right? It's what we find in yoga. And so I've been thinking a lot about as we loosen the bands of oppression collectively within ourselves. This is something that came with you and I, having left the Mormon church and just all the pain that came after that. And then where we are now, that pretty much anything that you do that is creative, anything is a way of really building your auric field and your spiritual connection to the oneness, no matter what it is, whether it's painting or drawing or writing or dancing or all of the above. So if you go through heartbreak or a difficult time, to use it as a medium for expression to get the pain outside of your body and onto a painting or into a journal so that you can work with it and release the pressure. And sometimes that can be fearful. I know a lot of people who have never meditated before. And I remember the first time I started, I knew I needed to meditate 25 years ago. And I tried, I did in little doses and I would do it in like a yoga class. But I remember when I was like, I need to start a real meditation practice. It was right after I left the church and I was terrified to start it. I thought that I was going to be like, I thought that there would be like bad spirits that would connect with me. I thought that it was this really bizarre, like all of the ideologies of just what I had collected over time, and internalized that it would be that I would be opening myself up to like bad things. And
yeah, you literally feared demonic possession. Like you thought that's like literally
what it would be
was
like
a possibility.
Which is kind of hilarious thinking about it at this point, because it really is like one of the things that brings me the most joy in my daily life. So, and the same goes for if you're happy, right? It's not just for the broody, disturbed moments of your life. It's about connecting and looking at it in terms of your energetic body as these like paintings. We've talked a lot about our manifesting paintings that we do, and getting, it's almost like the idea is birthed and it comes into your field, and then you're like pushing it out of your body, out into your field through the actionable things. So anyway, I wanted to talk about the Dakini, but I think you should talk about the phobias first, and then I can go into talking about the Dakini.
Yeah, no, I love how you brought up the idea that what we express and what we can create is medicine, for it's how we process experience, this expression. And if you don't do it, then it builds pressure and it creates problems, so I'm glad you brought up the whole pressure aspect of it. I wanted to talk about this. So this book, Creative Confidence by Tom and David Kelly, they're the creators of the IDEO design school at Stanford. And they are speaking about generating the confidence to act and not be afraid to fail and this and that. And they talk about phobia treatments, like for people who are afraid of snakes, for example. If you're trying to cure a snake phobia, you take these tiny, tiny actions that start with maybe just looking at a photo of a snake until you're standing in a room holding a gigantic snake. And the reason you're able to do that is you develop this beliefs about your own self-efficacy along the way. And you build this confidence. And they say the phobia in creativity is the fear of failure. So if we apply this to just changing our mindset toward a belief that we can be creative, we just have to take the small actions. We can only build courage through these tiny little actions. So if you're sitting and doodling on a napkin during your breakfast, this is a very low stakes action, but it is one that over time and with that amount of practice, you're going to want to graduate to real paper because your doodles are going to be excellent. Can you imagine if you did that every single day? It'd be 2 months and you you would believe oh yeah, I can draw, I can sit here and draw something.
You're so right about the confidence building though, because I think I never thought I was an artist in terms of drawing or painting. And I still don't think I'm that good, but I feel like I have been doing it as a process, as a way of awakening my right brain as much as I can in every possible way. I'll dance in my house, and I'm doing all kinds of weird stuff in my house, trying to conjure the creative juices for my book. And I find that it really is such a confidence builder because you're oh my gosh, that's not so bad. That's way better than I thought it would be. And so you start to think, well, maybe I am a person that's creative, you just have to try it. So much of creativity too is the rote discipline of being willing to be open. And then also the practice, right? The practice.
Exactly. Yeah. I think as you develop more and more confidence, you stop being paralyzed in this planning phase. You're in this idea phase and you're paralyzed and you haven't acted yet because you're afraid. But if you're used to acting and you're used to just create engaging with that, then you start feeling more and more okay with ambiguity. You understand that your true potential is still unknown. They talked about that in the book, the importance of a growth mindset. You have no idea what you're capable of. You're capable of anything really. And it's ability, true. Especially artistic ability, it has little to do with innate talent. It is practice and the courage to keep practicing in spite of all your fear and in spite of how bad your little napkin drawing looks or whatever. So yeah, in this whole fear spiel, I want to mention what Elizabeth Gilbert says. She says something in her book, Big Magic, something to the effect of done is better than good. So finishing something is better than trying thinking and planning until something's perfect. That is perfectionism paralysis. We need to be okay with finishing things before they're perfect because nothing is perfect. And I think for me at least,
I love
that's a major issue. That's a major pitfall, especially for me, because I growing up, I had always considered myself as a creative person. I have creative ideas and I'd be oh, I want to do this painting or I want to write this poem. But stopping there and thinking oh, I'm gonna plan for it a little more. I'm gonna write 2 lines of it. And then seeing oh, it's not really going to be as perfect as I was hoping it would be. And then stopping there while I still feel the warm fuzzies because, oh, I have the potential to write a poem, I think we can get caught up in that point too. It's not just the people who are I don't have any creative ideas or any creative talent. It's also the people who are like, I just feel like I have to be perfect, you know?
I remember in my previous life, meaning like back 15 years ago when I was in LA
Yeah.
being an actress, I studied with Leslie Kahn. And one of the things that she loved to say was dare to suck. And
Hmm.
I think as an actor, you know, it's really challenging to not allow your fear, your inhibitions to, you know, you're standing there, you're you, but you're also trying to embody another character and you're trying new things. And if you don't keep pushing the boundaries and like, if you don't mess up a few times and kind of suck, then you're never going to
Hmm.
be able to get better. I mean, I think of even as I've been writing this book, like I've had multiple chapters that just suck, like they're bad, and then I have other
Hmm.
chapters that are really good, but I can go back and I can work with the suckiness, you know. I can go back and I can
Right.
I can flesh it out and I can mold it and change it, and there really is some confidence in, just like you said, like finishing something and being like, well, I did it, like I wrote 220 pages and like I did that, so what else could I maybe do, you know, what else is possible?
Yeah, and back to what you were saying about the product being emphasized, the danger of that for us is like we see, oh yeah, this person painted this beautiful masterpiece, but what we don't see is like the number of like horribly crappy paintings that they painted before that in order to get there. Like that is the reality of creating things, is the people who succeed, especially the ones who really succeed, are the ones who are okay failing hundreds and thousands of
Oh
times.
yeah, and any business owner will tell you that, and any
Yes.
process, right? I mean, I think of all the freaking things I've done that have failed. Good grief. That's a
Right.
whole separate podcast. So, I wanted to add one thing to the fear factor. The
Hmm.
So this week I've been trying to finish my book, and I've been researching this concept of the Dakini, which is kind of, you know, as you start to dig into some of these religious archetypal gods and goddesses, it can get dicey because, you know, according to this person, it's like this, and according to that person, it's like this. So this is kind of what I've gathered about it. So the Dakini, they're the sky dancers, and they're this mixture of empty space, of limitless space. They're the emblem of meditation. And this is in Hinduism. And they're also used in certain parts, in certain Buddhist sects. But they're the protectors of wisdom, and they make sure that the inner eye is activated. And they talk about how duality isn't a problem, the light, the dark, the masculine, feminine, as long as we can access the luminous emptiness. And it was interesting because there's a really good lecture on YouTube by Judith Zimmer Brown called The Dakini in Tibetan Buddhism. I think she's the religious chair at Naropa University, but it was a very calm, academic, clear description of this particular archetype if you want to tap into this archetypal energy. And also Khandro Rinpoche has one that's really short called What is Dakini on YouTube. Anyway, what was interesting is as I was researching it, there were some videos that were just like zombie, like super scary, kind of that, like, depending on who you talk to about the goddess Kali, right? It's like Kali is either
Right.
like this creatrix and she's like this amazing goddess and she like burns things down, or it's like people really focus on the gore. Like she's all of those things. And I think the Dakini are supposed to be all the aspects of femininity. They're your lover, they're your sister, they're your friend, they're your mother, they're your grandmother, you know, they're your child. They're all aspects and essences of womanhood. And it was interesting because as I was leaning into this idea, I thought, I know it helps me to think about these archetypal energies as I'm trying to create, as I'm either a muse or even when I'm thinking about themes that I want to bring into what I'm writing. It just made me think a lot about this idea of the receptivity, like of empty space, that this particular thing embodies all the aspects of femininity and yet at its purest essence is empty space, and that the temples of these Dakini are all open to the air, open above. There's no roof, and they leave it there so that the Dakini can move into space. They're the sky dancers. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of a,
Oh, that's fascinating. So they're like the muses of Hinduism
well, you know,
in a
the
way.
stuff that they're in Hinduism, but the stuff that I was reading about was in Tibetan Buddhism. And
Okay.
yes, they're muses. Some people would say that they are actually like earthbound type spirits. Other people would say that they're aspects of the goddess. Some say they're the aspects of the goddess Kali. There's different, depending on who you talk to, I think there would be a different story, as you always find in any sort of like religious based thing. It's something I'm always a little nervous about when we talk about this stuff, to say, I'm not a religious scholar, but we did do several hours of research on this. And that was kind of what I found. It's really an interesting, and there was some, like in the new age communities, there were a lot of women kind of doing these like very sensual, like sexual type dances, kind of calling in the Dakini, like this is the time for the woman now. This is like the rise of the divine feminine, which is a theme that's happening collectively. Right. And so, so I think some people are using it as a way of like bringing in that feminine power, but then it's just interesting how you put on a different lens and all of a sudden she's like a zombie, like super spooky, that like, I always look at it like my perspective, my judgment of it, which is personal, right? I mean, I might not be right, but it's that when I see like these like aspects of womanhood that are like super scary and like zombie, like Walking Dead type imagery, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a man's fear of a woman's creative power. Like that is a patriarchal projection of like how powerful it means to really be creative.
Well, yeah, because
and that there's also the darkness. There is darkness in there. And I think, I can be nurturing and loving, and I can be a really big bitch sometimes. So it's all in there, right?
It's all there. Yeah, that is a fact. I love that you brought up the whole space idea, like with space, there's potential. And it reminds me of one of my favorite little mudras that I do. I don't remember what it's called, but it's the one where you just cup both of your hands together in like a bowl. And that's one that I really like to do when I am seeking creative inspiration. It's like the receiving, like I have this little space in my hand and I'm ready to receive and then use my hands to create or whatever.
I wanted to share. So the Instagram handle is Kriya Arts, KRIYAARTS. And her first name is Jolie. And she wrote this really amazing, detailed expression of creativity in regards to acting and performance plays. And I wanted to just share it. And I think we're going to have her on the podcast here in a couple of weeks because I think she's got a lot to offer. So she said, hey there, I love your podcast. We were part of the Lisa Lister's She Is Lit Circle, which was amazing. That was my editorial. I'm not quoting that part. But anyway, she says, I was in Edinburgh performing a play and I wrote called Sisterhood. For me, theater is all about spirituality. There is a hard to find book called The Death and Resurrection Show, From Shaman to Superstar, where the writer Rogan Taylor discusses how all performance and art derives from people of old who'd beaten death and loved ones wanting to know how they'd survived. They couldn't explain it in words, so they used noises, movements, mimes, and drawings. These actions then became sacred rites. And that is where all art came from and where the shamans came from. They're symbiotic. Clowning, and more specifically fooling, are the most direct creative lines back to the earliest shamanic roots in the theater lineage. I've trained and lived and now teach as a fool for 17 years. It's led me on the most incredible inner and outer adventures. So I just thought that was really interesting. She said that most of their spiritual fooling practices called circle plays, and they are as profound as drinking ayahuasca, for example, but done purely through drama. So the aim is to explore and to get to know your inner world, to learn it as a paint palette of archetypes, themes, moods, images, and characters. And then they use this palette to paint with during their improvised theater. Theater then becomes a simulation within our reality, just as our reality might be a simulation within another reality. I love that point. Theater in pure essence should actually be a martial art for emotions and working with adrenaline. You can tell this woman is a great writer. I love how she's expressing all of that. So instead it got covered in glitter, and the ambition and capitalism has tried to separate it from its roots, from its spiritual roots. So the roots are deep. In fact, you can't really make theater without spirit. Anyway, I think she's got a lot of really cool things. So we're going to have her on the podcast to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because if you think about what we know of certain ancient mystery schools and all the rites, they always involved some sort of play.
Right.
That was
some ritualistic
of, like,
play. Exactly.
Death and rebirth, like all of them had that.
Right.
So yeah, that'll be fascinating. I can't wait to hear that interview.
And I think I lead shamanic journeys, and I think part of that is like creating a scene for people to go into and then allow their own brains to kind of take them down into their, lower world.
Yeah, it's all engaging with your imagination. Are there do we want to talk rituals?
I think we should.
Other rituals and stuff that we
Yes.
do, and that like ideas?
Yes. Let's move into that. So Aimee, what are your rituals? Let's get real specific here.
Okay, fine. We'll do the specific first. So lately I have been taking my walk every morning where I like breathe my way around my apartment complex, but then there's this little patch of woods that I like go into, and there's this tree that I found that I stand in front of, and I'll just like talk to the tree, and sometimes out loud, even if I'm not feeling too sheepish, but usually just in my mind. And I'll like converse with this tree, and I found that like it really just puts me in this kind of creative vortex, I feel. And I always while I'm standing out, and sometimes I'll go out in like the mudra that I talked about, like I'll just hold my hands like that while I'm breathing. It's kind of different types of meditation every day. But what happens is like I'll get all these ideas while I'm out there, and I'll get all these lines for poetry. I'll usually come home afterwards and like sketch out like some sort of visual that came to my mind with the intent that like I want to turn that into a painting later, or I'll like write some lines down and write a poem about the experience, because it's always this weird thing, that can be turned into art. And so that's my little ritual that I've been doing lately.
I love that. When you were talking about it, I just kept thinking of what you were doing is channeling childlike wonder. Like when you think about as a child, you just walk outside and like everything is possible. Like you're a pioneer one day, and then you're a police officer, and then you're like whatever you want to be in that moment as a child, and it's all okay. And I think what it sounds to me like what you're doing there is really you're like peeling away the layers of that adult egoic of like, I mean, I heard you say the word, it's kind of this weird ritual. And I mean, I do that too. I say that, but it's like, that's like our adult judgments of like society and conditioning of like, exactly. Why is that weird? Like, it's not
weird. It's normal. It's like natural child stuff.
Well, to me, I'm like, that's genius. Actually, I think that is like a genius way of connecting creatively.
To take it like for anyone listening right now, I like that you brought up the childlike wonder, Hilary. I think that it would be a good assignment for people to think about what they used to pretend to be as a kid. Like, how did you use your imagination? For me, I was always, if I was swimming, I was a mermaid. If I was like walking, I was a fairy, like in the trees. So if listeners can think about like how did you used to pretend, and then make some sort of expression of that. Draw a little sketch, or write a little poem. Why are you laughing?
I'm not laughing at you because I'm thinking like, knowing you, I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense that you would be like a mermaid or a fairy. And I was thinking when I was a kid, I was always like an orphan or like a pioneer suffering in the woods. And I was like, that's some interesting conditioning or past life or what the heck?
I know when pioneer was like the first thing you said, I was like, really? What?
Oh, we had this. That's so funny. I know we had this family ranch, right? And anyway, we had all this like, anyway, it's weird. That is weird, but yes.
Well, that's because you grew up in like the central
and the woods. We were like
pioneer hub. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, when we were always out in the woods, like pretending to be like old-timey folks. But it was usually we always laugh about it, my cousins and I, because we constantly acted out like the abusive orphanage lady who's like hurting the children and the children running away. Like it must have been when Annie came out, like the Annie musical. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. That's so funny.
Okay, that's why I was laughing. I wasn't laughing at you. I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, that seems so much more normal to be a little girl and pretend to be a fairy and a mermaid. And I was like,
well, whatever you have though, whatever you have to work with around you is how you pretend.
Oh my gosh. Either that or I was like a hard-nosed businesswoman. I was always playing like bank.
You were.
I was always playing
you always were.
Money. And I was like, all right, I'm in charge of
Well, that's the other thing that it does. It reminds you of like your natural inclinations and gifts when you do this too. I mean, like yours is more applicable. I don't know that my natural gift is like.
I totally feel like you have major fairy energy though. Like that makes perfect sense now that we're like into the more esoteric stuff. It's like, yes, you're such a nature person. Like it makes perfect sense to me. Anyway, I love it.
Okay. What else?
So my specific rituals that I'm doing a lot. it's different all the time, but the thing that has stayed the same is I put together playlists, music playlists of like either binaural beats or some sort of like evocative wordless, instrumental piece that creates a scene in my brain. And then I always do Kundalini breath work before I start writing, or chanting or something. So I find that just helps me to create sacred space. Either that, or I do the opening of the sacred space prayer that I've learned through shamanism. So there's just various aspects of that. I've noticed for me, like I mentioned earlier, I've been doing a lot of nature walks and I've been traveling. I purposefully try to go away, even if it's like an hour away in a car. Like I try to get out of what I'm doing every day so that I can see different people, different things, different experiences. And it opens my mind back up, because you can get into a rut when you're just like in your daily grind of like making food and cleaning the house and like, doing work or whatever it is that you're doing. So I've been trying to do that. And the one thing that I've been practicing, and what I've noticed the more that I practice this, is I've been noticing these angel numbers, right? Like the 111, 222, 333, 444, 1111, all these numbers that we see. And I remember I started seeing them a few years ago and like actually paying attention and just not really knowing what it meant. Like, what does that even mean? Okay, so I see that. So what? And just in the last couple of months, I used to just take it to mean that I was like on the path, that it's like, oh, it's just confirmation that you're like following your own heart and you're in line with yourself, and you're not, falling to some other force that's oppressing you, whatever that might be. And now I find when I see the angel numbers, I will try to just take a deep breath and like receive the download, like whatever it is that wants to come in. I just try to like clear my mind for a second, and just sometimes it's tangible. And sometimes I think, oh, maybe I'm just receiving a quanta of energy of love from the other side, or a quanta of energy from, the oneness or whatever it is. I like to look at it as an actual connection to the divine. It helps me to remind myself of my spiritual practice throughout the day. So
yeah, that's great. And you always talk about like accessing this stuff like as though you're plugging into something. And I think that's really helpful imagery. So for listeners, whatever they can do that makes them feel like clear enough to plug into whatever whatever it is that exists,
Oh my gosh. I love that you're saying that, because I had this, I had a session with my teacher this last week. And one of the things that came up, one of the images over and over was this, it was literally a plug that goes into the wall. And it was my imagery for like, how do you continue to generate energy? Because I have so many goals and ideas, and I get so much joy from that. But I'm also like, I don't want to run myself into the ground. And I think that's a really great, like to your point, that is a helpful imagery for me, because I don't walk around inspired all the time. I'm living my life as a human too, just like everybody else. But it's helpful when it's like, all right, now's the time. And I don't have to do some like 45-minute ritual to like get into the space. I just like envision, okay, like I'm putting my headphones on. And so I'm getting in the zone, and I'm able to kind of crank out some material, and it's getting easier every time. Just, I feel like, and meditation's like that too, right? The more you do it, the easier it is to just sync up.
Yeah, people have all sorts of interesting rituals that they do to kind of get them into that space. And I'm not remembering exactly what book I read this in. It was probably The War of Art, which is another amazing one that we mention all the time. I think that's the one where he talked about kind of seducing the muse. Like before he sits down to write, actually, this wouldn't have been him because he's a man. This was a woman saying that she like puts on lipstick and makes herself like look appealing in order, like just to do her creative work in order to seduce the muse. This was probably Elizabeth Gilbert, actually, now that I'm thinking of it. Stephen Pressfield, War of Art, he also talks about the muse. But yeah, it can be helpful to view these things as like external energies, dakinis, muses, whatever it is, to like harness, to try to, I think seduce is a really good word, because it's like You are trying to make yourself as alluring as possible for the creativity to flow through.
I
And
love that.
whatever way, well, like however that is symbolized to you, like that's what you can do to get into this.
Well, and I like the idea too that it's like you are creating your just like you if you were going on a hot date, right? You're like wanting to make yourself
Right.
receptive to whoever it is that you're
Uh-huh.
with, and think about that as in terms of just I want to create that open space for my higher self, my more creative self to come through. I'm not so closed off and so judgmental. And so much of it does have to do with like the mindset of like being a victim or being like a perpetrator or like just getting over yourself for a second so that you can push
Mhm.
whatever trauma that's going on, which, you know, everybody's got real trauma that they're dealing with, but they can push it aside to allow whatever wants to come through.
Right. Other things I wanted to mention in this domain is the idea of creating containers for your creativity. And this is something that can be in the form of like a time limit, a deadline. This can be done with taking courses, like I love the course model because it not only gives you this container to explore your creativity in, it also gives you a community of support of people validating you. Like I'm doing this writing Find Your Voice course with Robin Rice and Emily McDowell. But it's been so nice to just have this container, for writing, and then have community of people helping you get over your fear of like expressing with others. So I love the course. The tarot reading that we did at the beginning is another example of a creative container that we used to guide our podcast creation. So just finding different things to kind of enclose so you're not so like floating, because it can feel too big
Right.
when you're just
Overwhelming. Yeah. To kind of, how
exactly.
do you like shoot that overwhelming feeling out of the tree and be able to
Exactly.
continue on the hunt?
Yeah, for artists, for people who like to make art
Mhm.
contests are another really great way to do that, because especially the free ones, because you have a time limit and it can kind of guide your creation.
I love that you said that. I had the same experience. I've done 2 of Lisa Lister's She Is Lit. It was basically during a moon cycle, right? It's 28-day course. And I got a lot of really great, that really helped me to get my footing with what I'm writing, get that going. And it was having the container. And I felt like it was, everything else kind of fell apart in my life during that month, but I got a lot of writing done.
Yeah.
And it was actually perfect because by the end of the moon cycle, I was like, okay, I need to take a break. I need to like make appointments for my kids. I need to clean the house, to go grocery shopping, just do those things. So
Right.
there was, yeah, that's been something that's really helped me in terms of actually making actionable time to create. Because obviously you can kind of get in the flow, but it's also been shifting my mindset of something that I have to do to something I get to do. Like I really look at my writing in terms of like right now, even where I'm like in the final stages of tweaking and it's a little bit painful, I really look
Mhm.
forward to doing it every day. And I kind of can't wait to get back to it. And so I think that feels like a win to me. I'm like, okay, of course I want this to be published. Of course I'd love for people to read it. But if it doesn't, then what this was for me was it was my masterclass on learning how to actually become a writer, to where I can show up every day.
Right.
And it's like the thing that I do that's for me, that I love, that feels like Virginia Woolf says, like it's a room of my own. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Because once you start practicing and acting, you slowly gain that confidence and you realize how much you're capable of. Like you realize how much you can do. So yeah.
Yay.
Anything else, Hilary?
I
That
feel
was
like this is a
really
long one, so hopefully we haven't
it
gone too
is.
long, but lots of information. And for those of you, the thing I want to say to our listeners before we part is really that
Mhm.
the world needs your creativity. So if you're feeling,
Oh,
yeah, if you're
yes.
feeling real, Amy's over there like doing a cheerleading move. So if you're feeling like you don't have it in you or you're scared to share your light with the world, like we need it. We need it. We need it now more than ever. And I know we have a lot of healers and a lot of creative types, and we have moms and businesswomen and everything in between. And the world needs your creativity in whatever field that you're in. It needs you to show up and bring that into humanity. So I would encourage you.
Amen.
Yes. Thank you. So I would encourage you all to dance with your muse this week and to see what it means for you to be creative and really view it as an offering to humanity. It's your gift. It's your gift that you're giving all of us by showing up in your truth, in your highest power, in your highest self, and finishing the project that you're working on, or finishing the book that you're writing, or finishing the art that you're doing, or showing up to your business and like being your most creative self that day. Like, it's the most rewarding thing, and we need it. We all need it.
Absolutely. I have one more quote to share that is exactly in line with that, from Emily McDowell, who I mentioned. She was one of our guests a couple months ago. She writes amazing things, but one quote that she recently wrote and illustrated is, "We are so lucky that flowers don't hold themselves back because other flowers are blooming." So exactly. I mean, amen to everything you said. We need your contribution. Like, the garden needs your flower in full bloom.
I love it. And I find for me too, as I've shed the domination submission patterns in the ways that I have, and I mean, it's always a process, I find I'm so much more inspired by, like, I get so pumped up when I see someone really standing in their truth. When I see someone like really showing up and like doing their authentic work, I am so inspired. Like, it gives me chills just thinking about it. And so I find like that we need it. Like, I need it. I personally need it. So please, and share with us whatever it is you're working on. Tag Intentionists or hashtag Intentionists, or actually tag us, because then we'll actually see it. But if you're working on a project and you want to share, whether that's, you're putting together your new healing space or your new business or whatever creative project, please share with us. We are so inspired, and we love to share it with our community as well. So with that, we bid you adieu. We wish you all the best and all the love and the light of the whole entire universe on this full moon.
Have a beautiful, creative week, everyone.
Yes, and more creativity to come.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.